I'd owned that stretch of Texas land since before most of the people now living in the county were even old enough to vote over 600 acres of mesquite. Dry creek beds, and thick wild grasses that rolled across gentle hills like they'd been shaped by the wind itself, untouched, raw, and sacred in a way only old land can be, passed down through generations in my family. Not for sale, not for lease. Just left as it always had been, a place for me to breathe, to walk at sunrise with dust on my boots, to bury dogs with names that meant something, and watch white-tailed deer graze at dusk without the sound of traffic. And for decades, that land had stood silent and undisturbed, until the day I drove out to the north pasture and saw rooftops, not one or two, but dozens, shiny asphalt shingles, catching the morning light like scales on a fish. Row after row of cookie-cutter homes I'd never approved, never authorized, never agreed to, all standing right in the middle of what used to be my grandfather's favorite turkey blind. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but maybe the heat was playing tricks on me. But no. They were real, and worse, they were occupied. Children's bikes leaning against garages, potted plants on porches, people walking dogs down streets I hadn't even known were paved, and when I finally got a hold of the county clerk's office, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. A local developer named Langston Holdings had filed paperwork on an abandoned tract based on outdated maps from the 1960s. Maps that predated the corrected deed entries I'd updated 20 years ago, and because the county assessor's office had gone digital without cross-verifying original survey data, my land had been listed incorrectly as available for reclassification, and Langston's people had moved fast, pushing the permits through using a shell HOA called Silverback Estates, who claimed to be representing a group of families seeking affordable rural living, but in truth were just corporate placeholders, fake names signed in ink that still smelled fresh when I demanded copies from the recorder's desk. I stormed down to the development office, papers in hand, and demanded to speak to anyone who could explain how 110 houses had been built on my land without a single call, letter, or knock on my door, and all I got were shrugs, bureaucratic spin, and one overconfident lawyer in a blue suit telling me I should be grateful because the land had finally been put to good use. I could have swum on him then and there, but I didn't, because I've learned that real revenge doesn't come with fists, it comes with facts, with truth, and sometimes, if you're patient enough, with storms, and it just so happened that storm season was already brewing across central Texas, and while I started gathering every scrap of paperwork, hiring a land rights attorney, and contacting local media to expose the fraud, nature had her own plan, one that didn't involve lawsuits or courtrooms, but rather clouds, heat, and one hell of a flash flood system that hadn't been seen since 2007. When the same basin these homes now sat on turned into a 2-hour-wide temporary river in under 12 hours. A fact I knew intimately, because I'd spent years maintaining the watershed and warning anyone who'd listen never to build in the basin, warnings that, of course, Langston Holdings ignored in their rush to subdivide and profit. I watched those homes rise week by week, helpless as the county dodged responsibility.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Rise week by week, helpless as the county dodged responsibility, and the title offices passed the blame like a hot potato. And all the while the sky began to shift hotter days, sudden winds, the kind of pressure that makes your bones ache if you've lived long enough to feel storms coming before they break the horizon. And I remember standing out there one evening in May, the horizon glowing a strange copper hue, the air thick and quiet, and I said out loud to no one, "You're built on land that doesn't forgive," because this wasn't just my property, it was the land's story too, and it had been interrupted, violated, scraped and paved, and poured over like it didn't have memory, like it didn't have bite. By the time the first storm hit, it was already too late. The drainage systems were overloaded in under an hour, and I stood on the high ridge that I still owned, legally untouched, and watched water pour off the northern bluffs like someone had pulled a plug in the sky, flowing into cul-de-sacs, flooding garages, rising into living rooms faster than any of those panicked homeowners could lift a sandbag. The HOA president, a man named Cole Baker who'd moved into the model home just weeks prior, tried to order a coordinated response. But they didn't even have proper emergency infrastructure. No elevation buffer, no overflow zones, just retention ponds that filled like soup bowls and spilled into the next row of homes like dominoes. Falling in reverse, over 60 homes flooded that first night, power lines down, emergency responders blocked by narrow roads and overwhelmed by the scale of it all. And as dawn broke, I walked down the county road with a folder in hand, original plats, corrected deed filings, and a declaration of trespass notice I'd had notarized and ready to deliver, and as FEMA trucks rolled in, as reporters' crews gathered near the mess, I handed that folder to the sheriff himself and said, "They built without asking. Now they can clean it up without me." And he didn't argue, because he knew the truth by then too, had seen the records, seen the fraud, and had quietly warned his own brother not to buy one of those homes 6 months earlier. But it wasn't just one freak storm, no. What came next was worse. The rains didn't stop, and for 2 solid weeks, Central Texas was hammered by thunderstorm after thunderstorm. The ground already saturated, runoff flowing like rivers down the backlots and alleys of the subdivision, and the poorly installed culverts burst, turning entire blocks into lakes, and by the end of the month, only 17 of the 110 homes remained habitable, the rest condemned, evacuated, or sitting in 2 feet of standing water, drywall ruined, foundations cracked, mold creeping up insulation. Like a sickness, and insurance companies began pulling out, denying claims based on illegal land development, saying the homes were never zoned to begin with, and that's when the real panic started, when homeowners who once waved and smiled now stood in the HOA's office demanding answers, their hands shaking with soaked documents and ruined family photos, and the HOA could do nothing but spin, lie, and crumble, all while Langston Holdings quietly deleted web pages and reassigned their development reps to new counties, hoping no one would notice the firestorm they'd left behind. But I noticed, and I wasn't done, because this wasn't just about nature taking back the land. This was about making sure every name behind this theft was dragged into the daylight. One deposition, one subpoena at a time, and that's exactly where I was headed next. What happened after the rains wasn't just cleanup, it was reckoning. And while the homeowners waded through insurance nightmares and soaked carpet, I was sitting across from my attorney, a seasoned property rights bulldog named Sharon Mathis, who looked over the evidence we'd collected, the maps, the deed history, the fake plats, the forged rezoning requests, the HOA charters filed under corporate aliases, and with a calm, almost surgical tone, she said, "We're not just going to reclaim your land, we're going to make them wish they never heard your name." And that's exactly what we did, starting with a land title injunction that froze every transaction tied to the subdivision, making it impossible to sell, refinance, or even legally reside on those parcels until the court ruled on ownership, which took less than a week thanks to the ironclad deed records dating back to 1903 that had been preserved in a bank vault and signed by the original land commissioners. And once the county judge saw the extent of the fraud, she didn't just rule in my favor, she referred the case for criminal prosecution, naming Langston Holdings, the heads of Silverback Estates HOA, and 2 now former county planning officials as defendants in what the papers called the biggest rural property heist in Texas history. But for me, it wasn't about headlines. It was about reclaiming not just dirt and water, but the principle of it. The idea that someone could look at a man's legacy, decide it was unutilized, and pave it over like cabaret. His name didn't mean a damn thing, like his family hadn't bled on that soil. But what they didn't understand is that Texas land doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. And when you build where you're not welcome, the ground will find a way to remind you, whether through sinkholes, rising waters, or thorns cracking up through foundation slabs. Over the next month, I watched the remaining homeowners try to fight back, but without deeds, without zoning approval, and with structural damage caused by nature and negligence. Most of them just packed up and left, their houses rotting behind them like empty shells, and I could have bulldozed them all immediately. But I didn't, because Sharon suggested something more poetic. We filed a motion to have the entire development reclassified as a wetland restoration zone, citing stormwater retention necessity, which legally obligated the state to help return the land to its natural condition, meaning they would fund the removal of the homes, the roads, the electrical grid, all of it under the banner of ecological remediation. And while the HOA tried to object, their charter had been nullified after being proven fraudulent, and their representatives literally had no legal standing to even be in the courtroom. It took 6 weeks, but by mid-July, the state had crews tearing up the asphalt, removing waterlogged drywall from skeleton structures, and stacking twisted metal porch railings like bones on the side of the access roads. And I stood on the ridge every morning, sipping my...
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
access roads. And I stood on the ridge every morning, sipping my coffee, watching the land slowly reclaim itself, like a body healing from surgery, scabbing over where it had been cut. And while some folks called it revenge, I didn't see it that way to me. It was justice, slow and natural and deeply personal. And it didn't stop there once Langston's fraud was exposed. Sharon and I pursued a civil case for damages, and we won, forcing them to pay me for lost timber value, wildlife disruption, and $250,000 in punitive damages for the emotional toll of having to stand by while my land was desecrated. And though they tried to file bankruptcy, we'd already filed liens on their assets, meaning their property, office building, their vehicles, and even the model home furniture got liquidated to pay off the judgment, and I donated every penny of that money to local veterans' land access programs, because if anyone knows what it means to fight for what's yours, it's a soldier without soil. And what of the land now? It breathes again, the creeks run clear, the bluebonnets bloom in the spring like they used to, and the deer have returned to the basin, their hooves silent across the soft ground that once echoed with HOA leaf blowers and children playing on property their parents never truly owned. People still talk about it in town, how the subdivision rose overnight and disappeared just as fast. How a man who spoke little and carried everything in silence managed to bring down 110 homes without ever raising his voice. And sometimes I'll see folks drive by slow, hoping to glimpse the ghost of what used to be there. But all they'll find now is wind, sky, and wild grass swaying where fences once divided the stolen land. And if they stop to ask, I just smile and say, it was never theirs to begin with. There are still lawsuits, appeals, angry letters from homeowners who feel like victims, and I do feel sorry for some of them. Those who were genuinely misled, but not enough to give back what was taken. Because justice isn't about making everyone happy, it's about making things right. And what's right is that 600 acres are whole again, healed, and protected with new surveys, new signage, and new vigilance from a man who learned the hard way that silence invites thieves, and that the land, if respected, will always rise to defend itself, and now, every time it rains. And I hear the thunder rolling across the bluffs like cannon fire. I think not of destruction, but of warning, of balance restored. And I know that what was stolen has not only been reclaimed, it has been reborn. And even after the final house came down, and the last splinter of siding was hauled away in a flatbed truck bound for landfill, it still didn't feel real. The silence where there had once been morning leaf blowers, HOA clipboard patrols, and weekend barbecue noise felt both sacred and surreal. Like waking up from a long nightmare and realizing the house around you is still standing, only cleaner, somehow stronger for having survived the storm. And I remember walking that land, barefoot and alone one humid August morning. The soil still soft beneath my feet from the summer rains, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind you pretend to feel when someone hands you a settlement check or a lawyer says we won, but the real kind. The kind that creeps into your bones when you realize the thing you fought for didn't just survive, it came back better, wilder, purer. The state wrapped up their reclamation work by the end of August, reseeding native grasses, pulling invasive shrubs, and regrading the basin with the kind of precision my grandfather would have approved of. And I made a decision then, one that surprised even Sharon when I told her. I put the northern 300 acres into a conservation trust, legally protected from development forever, not for tax breaks or legacy, but because I'd stared into the face of what unchecked...
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
or legacy. But because I'd stared into the face of what unchecked greed could do to something beautiful, and I never wanted another man, no matter how rich or smooth talking, to carve roads or lay concrete over it again. And if that meant fewer paths, fewer structures, fewer improvements, then good, because nature doesn't need improvement, only protection. The remaining 300 acres I kept under personal ownership, with reinforced title protections and layered legal notifications that now trigger the moment anyone even attempts to redraw a plat line. And I had new boundary markers set in concrete and steel, 6 feet deep, monitored with trail cameras and GPS, because once you've had something stolen that mattered, you don't leave the doors unlocked ever again, and yet, oddly, I don't feel angry anymore. That rage, the white-hot burning I used to feel when I saw construction crews tearing through my pasture, has burned itself out, leaving behind a strange clarity, like a man who's been through fire and walked out the other side, scorched but not broken, tempered like steel. Langston Holdings is defunct now, shuttered, sued, and disgraced, and their CEO, a man named Trevor Langston, who once called my land idle dirt with unrealized potential, now works in a different state, a different name on the office door, hoping people don't Google his past. But I remember. I make sure others remember too, because history forgotten is history repeated, and I promised myself the next time a developer even breathes near this soil, they'll know exactly what happened the last time someone mistook my patience for permission. And yet the most powerful part of the story isn't in the court records or satellite images of vanished subdivisions. It's in the kids who come out here now with their school field trips. Who asked me why there are big flat patches in the grass where no trees grow, and why the dirt feels softer in certain spots. And I tell them the truth, that there were once houses here that shouldn't have been, and the land took them back. And I show them how the deer walk those old driveways now, like they never left, and how the creeks run clean again, and how frogs have returned to the man-made ponds that nature reshaped into wetlands with patience and rain. And time. Some of the families who once lived in those 110 homes still write to me, some angry, blaming me for their losses, others quietly apologetic, saying they didn't know, that they were lied to, that they bought into the dream and didn't ask who was selling it. And I don't answer them, not out of cruelty, but because the land already gave them the only answer that matters. You can't build where you don't belong, and if you do, eventually, something bigger than all of us will come along and set things right. Now I sit most mornings on the porch my father built, the same porch where he used to sip coffee in the pre-dawn light, and remind me, you don't own the land, son. You just borrow it from time, and I finally double her. Understand what he meant, that the land will endure long after our names fade from mailboxes and property lines, and if we honor it, it gives us peace, and if we don't, it gives us consequences. The county has since apologized. Not publicly, of course, government rarely does that, but the new land commissioner came out personally, shook my hand, and said what happened would never happen again. And I told him I hoped he was right, because if it did, I wouldn't be waiting on rain next time I'd come for it with lawyers, drones, and whatever tools it took to protect what's mine. And so the land is quiet now. Not empty, not...
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
And so the land is quiet now. Not empty, not desolate, but full of memory, of return, of justice carved into the very soil. And when visitors come, the rare few who earn the right, I take them walking and show them where the streets used to run. And I say nothing as they stand there in disbelief, listening to birdsong where generators once hummed, breathing air that smells like wild sage instead of fresh paint. And if they ask how it all happened, I just tell them, nature bulldozed it, not with machines, but with time, truth, and the storm that always comes for those who build where they were never meant to.